My name is Celine, I'm 25 years old, and I'm single. I don't have a full-time job, and honestly, I've been a bit of a homebody since middle school. I went to high school for a while, but eventually dropped out, so I only finished middle school. Since then, I've been living with my parents, working part-time, and picking up small jobs online whenever I can. I have an older brother named Maddox, who's 3 years older than me. He's everything I'm not, great at sports, popular, and super outgoing. Maddox never really wanted people to know he had a sister like me. He never brought friends over, and even when I bumped into him and his friends somewhere, like at the convenience store, he'd act like I wasn't there. At first, it hurt, but eventually I just accepted it and stopped caring. When he went off to college and moved out, it was kind of a relief for me. I didn't have to think about it anymore. Then recently there was news about him getting married. He was almost 28, so it wasn't a shock to anyone. Not long after, we heard he was bringing his fiancée over to meet the family, and since I was home that day, I decided to sit in on the visit. When Maddox walked in with our parents already seated, he seemed a little thrown off when he saw me there. "Hey, I'm home," he said, giving me a confused look. His fiancée walked in behind him, all smiles. She didn't seem to pick up on Maddox's surprise and introduced herself warmly, though when she glanced at me, I could tell she was silently asking Maddox, "Who's this?" It was pretty clear to me that he hadn't mentioned he had a sister. "Thanks for coming," my mom said, getting up to introduce herself. "I'm Maddox's mother, and this is his father," she added, motioning to my dad. His fiancée, Aloan, smiled politely and greeted them both, though I noticed she still seemed puzzled. Neither of my parents said a word about me. It's always been like that between us. When we were younger, they'd constantly compare me to Maddox, asking why I couldn't be more like him. As we got older, it got worse, with them calling me names like useless or a leech. Even now, they were happy to pretend I didn't exist. At one point, my mom got up to get more drinks. As she passed by me, she leaned in and whispered, "Why are you here? Go back to your room." I had hoped this meeting would be a chance to bond with my family in my own way, but it seemed I'd only made things awkward. I couldn't just walk out, so I stayed where I was. Aloan finally introduced herself, as if nothing had happened. She was my age, 25, but she was beautiful, graceful, and had this air about her that made me feel out of place. Maddox looked irritated, probably wishing I wasn't there. He introduced her to our parents, but it was like I wasn't even in the room. Once the conversation moved past the wedding plans, everyone began to relax and chat casually, except Maddox still didn't acknowledge me. Then, Maddox finally spoke. "So, what do you do, Celine?" he asked, looking at me for the first time. Before I could respond, he quickly cut in, "Wait, Aloan, you don't need to talk to her." Aloan looked surprised, and so was I. But before she could say anything, my mother added, "Yes, don't bother. It's not worth it." "Yeah, don't waste your time," my father chimed in. "She's just a relative by blood, nothing more." It was like something inside me broke when I heard those words. A stranger? I should have known. It hit me then that any hope of getting close to them had been foolish from the start. The rest of the meeting continued, as though I wasn't there. Not long after that, my brother and Aloan got married. They started building a house together, and it wasn't long before they finished. My brother had a good job at a well-known company, and even though he was still young, he made a decent salary. Aloan had already quit her job and was preparing to be a stay-at-home wife. When their house was completed, we got an invitation to a housewarming party. It was going to be a small event, just a few of Aloan's relatives and some of my brother's work colleagues. "Time flies," my mom said when the invitation came. "We need to get them a gift for the new house." "It's not like we need anything fancy, we're family," my dad said, flipping through the invitation casually. That's when I noticed something. Only my parents' names were on the invitation. Mine wasn't mentioned at all. My mom noticed it too, but tried to play it off. "Celine's coming too, right?" she asked. But I didn't care. After the way they'd treated me, it was clear I wasn't really welcome. "No, it's fine. I don't need to go," I replied. "No, you're coming," my mom insisted. "I'll make sure of it." So I ended up going. The day of the party, it started raining suddenly. My parents and I took a taxi to Maddox's new house. When we arrived, my parents immediately jumped out of the taxi and rushed toward the entrance without waiting for me. "Pay for the taxi," my mom said before hurrying off with my dad, leaving me to deal with the driver. After paying, I ran toward the house, getting soaked in the rain. When I finally reached the front door, Aloan opened it and looked at me with confusion. "Who are you?" she asked. It took me a moment to realize she probably didn't remember me from our last meeting. "I'm Celine, Maddox's sister," I said, smiling awkwardly. "Oh," she said, her expression turning cold. "The high school dropout, right? We didn't invite you. The parasite who lives off her parents." Aloan said those words casually, with a smile on her face. Just then, my brother returned after showing someone inside and spotted me. He frowned in disgust. "Why are you even here?" he muttered. Aloan turned to him, her voice firm. "Hey Maddox, I told you not to invite her. Why is she here?" "I don't know either." My brother shrugged, looking annoyed. It was clear my brother hadn't wanted me there in the first place, and now Aloan's attitude had completely changed once she learned who I was. In a way, she was even worse than my brother and parents. I hesitated and asked softly, "Would it have been better if I didn't come?" "Yeah, you're a nobody. Someone like you who didn't even finish high school doesn't really count as having any education, right?" My brother sneered. Aloan nodded, adding, "Could you leave the property quickly?" She sided with him without any hesitation, her calm expression never wavering. It was unsettling how composed she was while saying such cruel things. "Understood," I replied, turning around immediately. By this point, the taxi we had taken was long gone, and since the house wasn't on a main road, I knew it would be tough to get another one. I didn't have an umbrella, so I had no choice but to walk, getting drenched in the pouring rain. As I walked away, I could still hear Aloan laughing behind me. Eventually, I made it back home, soaked from head to toe. My parents came in later, looking like they'd had a great time. They barely glanced at me before my mother asked, "Why did you leave so suddenly? Couldn't even call a taxi back? You're so useless." "I'm sorry," I lied. I suddenly had a stomach ache. My mother scoffed. "So, you just left on your own for that? You're hopeless. Make sure you give the gift later. You're an adult after all," she snapped. My father chimed in too, acting as if I was at fault. I had brought a gift for the party, but in all the chaos, I left without giving it. I wanted to send it by mail, but I didn't know my brother's address. I thought about asking my parents, but things were tense, so I decided to message my brother directly. "I want to send a gift. Can you tell me your address?" I texted him. His reply came quickly. "I don't give my address to strangers." I sighed, staring at my phone. Was this how he really felt? Did he enjoy lording it over me, even when no one else was around? It wasn't just about not wanting to introduce me to others. It was about treating me like I didn't belong in his life at all. I started to wonder if it wasn't just my brother sending these messages. Maybe Aloan was typing them too, laughing while they both mocked me. Either way, it was pointless. I gave up on sending the gift. Their housewarming party, my brother, and his wife. None of it mattered anymore. That was the moment I decided it was time to leave home for good. I realized there was no way I could ever fix things with my family, and it was time to live my own life. I didn't have a steady job, but I had saved enough from my part-time work to rent a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. To make ends meet, I decided to try streaming videos in my free time. I had always enjoyed watching streams as a hobby, and I had a knack for spotting trends among popular streamers and figuring out how to increase views. When I started streaming myself, it took off faster than I expected. Within a few months, I was making tens of thousands of dollars, more than enough to cover my expenses. As the money grew, I decided to invest what I didn't need for daily living. Those investments paid off, and soon I was able to start a small business importing and selling goods. I was finally busy in a way that felt meaningful, and for once, I was truly happy. I didn't have anyone breathing down my neck, complaining about how I spent my time. Life was good. Then, out of the blue, a few months later, I got a phone call from my parents. We hadn't spoken since I left home. "We need your help with Maddox," my mother said bluntly. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. What could have happened to my brother, who had just built a new house and seemed to have everything together. My parents hesitated before explaining. It turned out that after moving into the new house, my brother had started hosting a lot of parties, mingling with all kinds of people, his bosses, clients, and Alohan's friends. One of those acquaintances introduced him to a big investment opportunity. Eager to make more money quickly, my brother jumped at the chance and ended up losing a significant amount of money. I was stunned. My brother had a good job. If he had just continued working and living sensibly, none of this would have happened. Who convinced him to invest? I asked. It was one of Alohan's friends, my mother replied. It's not a scam, though. How much does he need? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would be bad. The number my parents gave me was shocking, an amount no regular employee could pay off easily. My heart sank as I asked the next question, dreading the answer. Did you also invest? I asked slowly. After a pause, my parents admitted they had. They had gotten pulled into the same scheme. I can't come up with that kind of money, I said flatly. I'm sorry. I tried to end the call, but my mother's voice stopped me. We're your real family. You have to help us in times like this. Real family? It was a bit too late for that. I'm sorry, but I'm busy. Besides, aren't I just a stranger to you? I said before hanging up. Somehow, they found out where I worked, and not long after that, they showed up at the office of my company. I was in the middle of a business meeting when my secretary came in. Ma'am, there are guests here for you. They say they're your family. What? I felt a shiver run down my spine. I quickly apologized to my business partner and stepped out to the reception area. There, standing together, were my pregnant sister-in-law Alohan, my brother, and my parents. Maddox glanced around my office, smirking. So, you're in a company, huh? It's a lot smaller than the place I work. I pretended not to know them. Who are you? I asked, my tone cold. My brother's temper flared. What's with the attitude? Before he could say more, my mother stepped forward. We talked about this before. We need your help. You're running a company, so you can afford to help us, right? She asked, as if I owed them money. Yeah. We're going through a tough time. Alohan's about to give birth, and the baby needs special care. Please, Celine. My father and Alohan chimed in, acting as if it was my responsibility to fix everything. Employees walked by, glancing at the scene with worried looks on their faces. I needed to get rid of them, and fast. Please leave, I said firmly. You're causing a scene. My brother's face turned red with anger. What? We're a disturbance? We came all this way, and this is how you treat your family, he yelled, drawing the attention of the employees passing by. They stopped, watching the commotion unfold. Without any shame, my brother began to cause a bigger scene. Do you all know this girl dropped out of middle school? She was a shut-in, a total leech. It was clear he was trying to humiliate me in front of everyone, thinking that would force me to give him the money he wanted. But the reaction he got wasn't what he expected. One of the employees spoke up. We know. Everyone knows about the president's background. I do too. In fact, she's hired many of us who've been in similar situations. Is there a problem with that? My brother, who is used to dealing with only well-educated, high-income people, was caught off guard. He stammered, Before he could recover, my father jumped in. What a pathetic company. Just a bunch of failures, he spat, trying to back up my brother. Exactly, my brother added. Any company that works with a place like this can't be good either, he shouted. Just then, the president of the company I had been meeting with came out of the room, clearly having heard the ruckus. When my brother saw him, his face went pale. He immediately lowered his eyes, looking uncomfortable. What's wrong, Maddox? Alohan asked, confused by my brother's sudden change in demeanor. Idiot, don't say my name. My brother hissed at her, but it was too late. Maddox? Oh, it's you. The company president walked straight up to my brother, recognizing him immediately. You're the guy who always misses deadlines, right? Mr. Long, the division manager? We work with your company a lot. My brother was sweating bullets now, completely caught off guard. That's... The president gave him a cold smile. Oh, so I guess I'm not memorable, since this isn't a decent company, right? My brother froze, completely lost for words. My parents and Alohan, who had been so confident a moment ago, fell silent, realizing the trouble they were in. I turned to the president, apologizing. "I'm so sorry for wasting your time. I'll make sure they leave." He waved it off. "No worries. I've got time today, so if you want to finish talking with your family, I don't mind waiting." "They're not my family," I said, glancing at my parents, brother, and Aloan. "They're complete strangers to me." After that, my parents, brother, and Aloan were quietly escorted out of the building, too stunned to argue. I couldn't help but wonder how they found out about my company in the first place. So I did a bit of digging and discovered the truth. Aloan had been behind it all. It turned out that Aloan had a friend who was always up to date on investment opportunities and business news. This friend had noticed that a young woman in her 20s was gaining recognition as a successful trader and business owner. When Aloan saw a photo of this woman in the media, she realized, to her shock, that it was me, the very person she'd written off as a dropout and a failure. She had shared the discovery with my brother and parents, and they all plotted to ask me for money. Since I didn't answer their calls and hadn't responded after their initial request, they decided to confront me at my workplace. I had been treating them like strangers for a long time, and this only solidified my decision to cut ties with them for good. But something about Aloan still nagged at me, so I looked into her a little more. That's when I uncovered an even darker truth. Aloan's friend, the one involved in the failed investment, was actually her ex-boyfriend. And as it turned out, they were still involved with each other. Even more shocking, the child Aloan was carrying wasn't my brother's, it was her ex-boyfriend's. When my brother found out, he was devastated. Everything in his life had been a lie. Not only had Aloan been cheating on him, but she had also been extracting money from several other men, all under the influence of her ex-boyfriend. Unsurprisingly, my brother and Aloan ended up getting divorced. Aloan was arrested, along with her ex, but unfortunately, none of the money they stole will be recovered anytime soon. After the incident at my company, things got even worse for my brother. His reputation at work took a hit, and he was eventually transferred to a dead-end position. Frustrated and embarrassed, he resigned. He couldn't handle the financial mess he was in, and the stress only made things worse for him. Meanwhile, my father also ran into trouble at work. His boss had overheard him losing his temper with a subcontractor, and after looking into his behavior, they discovered he had a habit of making disparaging comments about people who hadn't graduated from prestigious schools. He was fired shortly after. In the end, both my brother and father lost their jobs. With their income gone, my so-called family still tries to contact me, begging me to let them move in with me. But I've made it clear that I have no intention of ever letting them back into my life. I even had them banned from my company building so they can't show up and cause trouble again. Despite everything that's happened, they still say things like, "We're family, right?" But my answer is always the same. "I don't know you. You're strangers to me." And that's the only response they'll ever get from me, no matter what.